Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk to you about one of the most enjoyable horror novels I've read for a while, Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is a book that's been on my radar for a while. I saw it reviewed by Sin from the channel Sin's Book Nook a couple of months ago, and she gave it a really glowing review. And that made me really want to read it. However, it's quite difficult to come by in the UK. For some reason, it hasn't been picked up by a UK publisher, so it's published by Tor Nightfire in the US. So you can't get it in the UK on Kindle. You can't get it, you can't buy a paper copy from Amazon or Waterstones or anywhere like that. So I had to resort to getting it from an indie bookstore I found through eBay. But it's well worth checking out. So if you're in the US, and I'm guessing perhaps some other territories as well, it's easier to get hold of. But even if you're in the UK and you have to pay a little bit extra for it like I did, I would definitely recommend it. So this was a buddy read that I did with one of my patrons, Chloe. I do a buddy read every month with people who are subscribed to my Patreon, where they get to pick the book. This was Chloe's pick for August, and it's actually a book she'd read before, so she liked it so much she wanted to read it again. And I'm really glad she picked it, because that spurred me on to pick up a copy, and as I say, I really enjoyed it. So it's a debut horror novel from Nat Cassidy, and I'm really keen to see what he does next. I think he has got another book coming out before too long. By the sound of it, he's been writing other things for a while. I think he's a playwright and things like that. But this is a really accomplished horror novel, especially for a first novel. And as I said in the video I put up on Sunday, where I talked about authors telling the stories of people from different groups than themselves, I was surprised to discover that Nat Cassidy is a guy. So this is a book about a woman who's going through the menopause, and it felt like a really authentic tale of that kind of, the experience of women going through that change in life. I thought Nat Cassidy did a really good job, and I was surprised when I was about halfway through to discover that he was a guy rather than a woman. I think the female characters in particular in this book are really well done. So what's it about? It's about this woman, Mary. As I say, she's going through the menopause, and the kind of genesis for the book is, and Nat Cassidy talks about this in the kind of author's note at the start, is he was kind of musing around the idea of what would Carrie be like as a book if Carrie didn't have the psychic powers that she has. And that's kind of the kicking off point for Mary. So Mary is somebody who has been terribly bullied at school, who's lived a fairly... what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of fairly closed in private life as a result. So she's one of those people who kind of blends into the background, who just gets on with her life. She's ended up moving away from the small town she grew up in and lives in New York and works in a bookstore. But, she's not married, she doesn't have any kids, and she just kind of floats through her life. She gets called back to go back to that town she grew up in when her aunt Nadine falls ill and needs someone to look after her. And Nadine is a fantastic character. She's a really cantankerous, kind of slightly horrific, slightly grotesque old woman, but really enjoyable to read. So Mary goes back to her hometown, and as a result of that discovers loads of things about her past, and loads of things, like loads of weird things about the town she grew up in as well, that she didn't know before. And I would say as well, the opening to this book, which takes place in the past, takes place in the 70s, is phenomenal. So it opens with the police capturing a serial killer who's been hiding in the walls of the mayor's mansion. So it's immediately kind of bewildering and utterly bizarre, the opening, and really quite chilling as well. It really grips you, and you feel like you kind of know what's going on, but you don't fully know, because you're just kind of seeing bits of it. It's really effectively done. It reminded me a bit of that sensation you get when you're watching a movie where the director does like a long opening scene which is done in a single take, where you've just got stuff kind of happening all the time around you. It's very much like that. Really effective, works really well. And then the story kind of jumps forward from there, so you see a bit more detail about Mary's childhood, and then comes to the present day and her return to the town. And as I said, Nat Cassidy, has clearly been influenced by Stephen King, but not in a way that feels kind of cheap at all. It really feels like he's made that a jumping off point, but then made the story his own. There are a couple of like King type traits to the writing though, which I thought were quite interesting, and which Cassidy uses effectively in this. So one is that thing that King does in his books where you get kind of intrusive thoughts that characters are having in kind of italics that just kind of insert themselves into the rest of the text. So Nat Cassidy does that with Mary's kind of inner thoughts, which works very effectively. And one of the other things he does is, which is something King does occasionally in his books, is there's a bit early on in the book where there's like an incidental character who's interacting with Mary, and then Cassidy, as the narrator, tells you how that woman will die decades in the future, which is just one of those weird things that King does every so often in his book. So I quite enjoyed the influence of Stephen King on this book, but it definitely feels like Cassidy has his own voice. He's not just someone who's recycling King's ideas. He's got his own ideas about how horror should work, and he's clearly someone who really enjoys horror. I don't want to get into spoilers, but as the plot of this book progresses, it pulls in loads of different themes and like plot lines and ideas and things like that from other horror things you may have seen and read. I would recommend not reading the back of the book, because there are some things that I think are kind of spoilers, things that only really come out as the plot progresses. So I would really recommend going into this book as blind as you can. But it is really effective, really gripping, really chilling at times, and the use of Mary as a central character and the fact she's going through the menopause is really well done as well. So it's not something that overwhelms the book. This isn't a book that's like a message book. It's a book that's a fun book to read. But the fact that Mary is going through the menopause, is referred to a number of times throughout the book and used effectively to help build up her character. And it's really the character work in this book that I think is the most effective part of it. So there's a lot about the plot that I liked, but it's really the fact that Mary is such an interesting central character, and Nadine is such a fantastic character as well. And there's a bunch of other like smaller, lesser characters, all of whom feel really fully formed and are really interesting to read. And all those things together make for a very satisfying book. But yeah, the plot itself, as it progresses, gets increasingly bonkers, but in a what I thought was a really, really entertaining way. So yeah, if you've not read Mary by Nat Cassidy, I thoroughly recommend it. I thought it was a really, really entertaining read. It had me gripped, but it had me grinning as well. It's one of those books that's just fun to read. And as I say, I'm really keen to read Nat Cassidy's next horror novel, just to see what he does next. So I hope you found that interesting. If you've read Mary, do let me know in the comments what you thought of it. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.